So what games can you actually play on a Steam Deck?
Well, the short answer to that question is almost anything. And I really mean anything. Almost. For games that are on Steam, the first place that people will check is usually the game's store page to see if it's verified. But there are actually loads of unverified games that work just fine. And then there are the thousands of other games that just aren't available in Steam. What about those? Well, for the purpose of this discussion, it helps to divide all games into one of two very broad categories. Those being PC games and console games. Well, let's start by having a look at the PC games, because if you have the option for a PC version of the game, you should always try to install that first. It's just going to be easier than going for a console version. You don't have to mess around with things like emulation. And basically, your PC games include games that you can get on Steam, which has its own verification system, and it also includes games that come from other stores like the Epic Game Store or GOG or wherever, right? So as I mentioned, Steam has its own verification system, which you can see on the game's store page in Steam. Now, the problem with this is it relies on people who work for Valve to actually test out all of the different games and to see how compatible they are, essentially, right? And because there's only so many people working there and doing this, they can only get through so many games at a time. And what that means is there are a lot of games that are still not been tested or even tested recently. Some of them have been tested before, but things change, they've been updated. So maybe now they're more compatible than they were before. So there's also this really good website called ProtonDB, which basically is crowdsourced information with games that are in the Steam library, but anybody can contribute to it. So if you go to protondb.com, you'll be able to see what this crowdsourced information looks like. And in a lot of cases, you'll actually find more up-to-date information than you would in Steam. So you'll find games that on the Steam store page will say they're completely unplayable, but actually, if you go and look in ProtonDB, you'll see they have their own rating system where sometimes it could be even platinum rated, which means it just works perfectly out of the box, even though Steam says it's not verified. So definitely I would recommend going and checking out ProtonDB if you're interested in knowing whether a certain game is compatible and that game also happens to be available on Steam. Now that applies to games that you might have purchased through another store as well. So if you've got, for example, Cyberpunk 2077, but you bought it on the Epic Store like I did, you can still go to ProtonDB to see whether it will run. By the way, it does. So that covers games that are available on Steam. But then there are also these other games that aren't, but which are still playable on a Steam Deck. An example of that might be Alan Wake 2, which for the time being is exclusive to the Epic Game Store on PC. So with games like that, you can easily just look it up on YouTube. Alan Wake 2 Steam Deck gameplay. There's bound to be someone who's tried it out, and you'll see whether they were successful or not. But if you want to install PC games from somewhere other than Steam, it's not quite as simple as just, download and play, right? So with the Epic Game Store, for example, and this applies to GOG as well, and I think one other, insert whatever that other one is over here. But basically, there's a third-party launcher called Heroic Games Launcher, and it works pretty well in general when you're trying to run something from a store like Epic, right? Or GOG. You can just integrate, you install it quite easily. I'll link a video. I've actually done a very, very quick tutorial on how to do it. I'll link the video to, it's a YouTube short, but yeah, I'll link that video. And so something like Heroic Game Launcher works really well for most of the games that you would get on GOG or Epic. But there are some games that just won't run on Linux, right? Which happen to be available on something like Epic Games. Fortnite, for example. Call of Duty, Warzone. Those games, they've got anti-cheat software, so the developers put a stop to people trying to run the game on Linux. And so for those types of games, you actually have to try a little more of a roundabout way. It's a little bit annoying, but what you can do is with something like Fortnite, there are still options, right? So with Fortnite, You could run it through Xbox Cloud Gaming, for example. That works really well. If you've got a decent internet connection and Wi-Fi set up in your home, that works really well. And you don't have to pay for it, which is something that a lot of people don't actually realize. Even though cloud gaming is something which you generally think of as coming with a Game Pass subscription, which of course is paid. If you're playing Fortnite, I think because it's a free game, you actually don't have to pay to play Fortnite on Xbox Cloud Gaming. You can still do that with your Steam Deck and not have to pay anything. You might have to wait in a queue, but it works really well. Another option would be GeForce Now, also a game streaming service from Nvidia. That also works really, really well. And then another option for Fortnite is you can actually install Windows on your Steam Deck. In fact, you don't actually have to install it on your internal SSD. What you can do is run it from an SD card. I've done that and it works. I mean, it works really well, actually. So those are some options for running Fortnite. Yeah, Minecraft is one where there is a PC version of the game, but it's not available on Steam, and it's also not available in Epic, as far as I'm aware. Let me actually check that for a sec. Yeah, no, Minecraft is not available on Epic. But yeah, there's a custom launcher. Again, just like Heroic, there's a custom launcher for Minecraft called Prism, which you can basically, if you look up the instructions on how to do it, essentially there's generally always a way to get a PC game running on your Steam Deck somehow. Sometimes you have to jump through some hoops, but generally, most of the time, it's pretty easy to do. Then you have games that were never ported to PC, right? So console games, things that were only ever released on some form of console, dating all the way back to the beginning of time in video games, basically. Generally, someone has built an emulator for whatever console it is. Just a quick note to say that if you like this video, if you're finding it useful, please support the channel by liking, consider subscribing even, drop a comment below, feed the algorithm, all those good things. Thank you very much. On with the video. So the great thing about emulation on a Steam Deck is there's this tool called EmuDeck, which is so user-friendly, an idiot could do it. Honestly, they've had so many updates to the point now, it's just smooth sailing. You can find it in the Discover Software Center, which you can get through desktop mode on your Steam Deck. Very easy to do. And once you have EmuDeck installed, the other two things that you're going to need are a BIOS file for the console that you want to emulate. You can just Google it, whatever, console name, BIOS. You'll find what you're looking for. It's as easy as that. Then the other thing you need is the ROM file of the game that you want to emulate. So again, Google it. I'm not going to show you where to find that stuff. Technically, you're not really supposed to do this type of thing. So yeah, if you have EmuDeck, you have your BIOS file for your console, and you have your ROM file for the game that you want to play, basically you have everything you need. You can just look up the instructions on the EmuDeck website, and yeah, it's a really easy process. But what you have is a few different ways in which you can run PC games, which, as I explained earlier, if you have the option for a PC game, for a PC version of the game you're after, generally that's the simplest thing to do, is to try and get the PC version running. But if there isn't a PC version and you want to play something from like an NES, emulation is super easy to do as well. And in fact, emulation tends to work really well on the Steam Deck with games about as recent as the PS3 or Xbox 360 generation. Most of those games work fine, and everything before those generations are, as far as I know, they just work really well. When you start to look at some of the games that were released right towards the end of that console generation, you might start running into some performance issues, because even though the Steam Deck is a lot more powerful than a PS3 or an Xbox 360, there's this additional overhead that's required to actually emulate that old hardware, which puts a load on the processing capability of the Steam Deck. So yeah, I think if you go up to Xbox 360 and PS3, for the most part you'll be fine. Beyond that, yeah, it's a little more difficult. But the good thing, ironically, is that for the PS4 and Xbox One generations onwards, a lot of those games are available on PC anyway. So Yeah, that's why I say you can pretty much play anything you like on a Steam Deck. There's a way to do it. Oh, and Nintendo Switch games run beautifully. In fact, they run better on a Steam Deck in most cases than they do on the Switch itself. So there are some exceptions to the rule of always going for the PC version. And I think that really applies to games that had a bad PC port. So one game that comes to mind is Deadly Premonition Director's Cut. It was PS2, maybe PS3. It was a PlayStation game initially. They ported it to PC, and it was a really bad port. It works especially badly with the controller layout, whereas the PlayStation version is made to run with a controller, and so the emulator version actually works better than the PC version. But that's quite a rare situation. In fact, that's the only one I can think of. And that about rounds it up, right? So essentially, no matter what game you're trying to play, there's usually a way to play it on a Steam Deck. Sometimes you have to put a little bit more time and effort into doing it, but most of the time it just works, which is one of the things that makes this such an amazing piece of tech. Honestly, I've been so impressed with it. I've had mine for nearly 2 years now. I will very soon be upgrading to the OLED model because I think it looks beautiful. But yeah, this LCD one has done me good. Anyway, cool. Thanks for watching. See you later.